Hi, this is Tara Bradley with the Growth State, and I'm super excited for our guest today. It is Gary Swart. Gary is a tech and healthcare investor, former executive with decades of experience, including general management of companies of all sizes, including sales, operations, staffing, and strategy. He's a general partner at Polaris Partners. He is advisor to a number of companies, and previously the CEO of Odesk, which is now Upwork, which you're probably all familiar with, particularly in this day and age of remote work. Gary's obviously had a very sales and administration and executive heavy background prior to moving into venture capital. So I appreciate you being here with us today, and I'm excited to pick your brain.
Thanks so much, Tara. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so I'd love to know that transition, I think, from executive into advisor is not always an easy one. And I'd love for you to share for us, was there a particular pain point or turning point where you're like, hey, I think my skill set is now better matched to this advisory capacity than maybe what I was doing as an executive, and caused you to kind of make that pivot?
Well, what was interesting was it wasn't as waterfall of a decision as you described. Fortunately, I had training wheels for years. So as I was the CEO of Odesk, I had the opportunity to go to lots of events and meet lots of entrepreneurs. A lot of our customers started asking me for advice. And lo and behold, I was a mentor and an advisor and a coach for years while I was also a CEO. So the nice thing about that is I got to do the job before I got the job.
Yeah.
Right? It was like training wheels. But I do have to say, at first, it was like anything in my career. When I first went from being a frontline worker to a manager, it was hard for me to make that adjustment. I thought, oh, I'm just going to manage people that look like me and act like me and tell them to do what I was doing. And similarly, when I was a CEO and became a coach, when I first had those training wheels, I would say that I didn't exactly know how to ride the bike. But by the time I became an investor, I had a lot of years of practice.
Yeah. Well, and your feedback loops get fewer and fewer, right? Like every time you take a step up, there's a lot less people advising you and saying, hey, you should maybe try it this way. So I can definitely appreciate that it would get easier with the training wheels. I know from following you and LinkedIn, and I will admit I'm a shameless LinkedIn stalker. So I know you're very active with the groups that you advise, as far as, pinging them on LinkedIn. And I don't know that that's always the case when you've got VC backing or advisors. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about your strategy with that, and what has gotten you excited about sharing in that space, because we don't see that probably as much, I think, as we would hope to, from our partners.
Well, it's a couple of things. One is I thoroughly enjoy it. I mean, I truly get. I think in my next life, I might even think about being a professor or teach at a local college or university, because I just really enjoy that. And I wish that I had more of that when I was in school, even, like way back when I was an early entrepreneur. It would have been great to have the resources that I think are available now. The other thing is I'm old. Like, I'm older and I've made so many mistakes. I've got a ton of experience from decades of operating, and anything you can do to help people avoid some of the same pitfalls or mistakes that I made, I just get a lot of satisfaction out of that. And so that's sort of the motivation. And then, the blogging on LinkedIn or writing content, it's sort of the one to many.
Right.
You can mentor one entrepreneur at a time, or you can get leverage by speaking to many entrepreneurs at a time. And so I enjoy that as well. Sort of the leveraged acquisition. If I'm going to spend an hour, why not help multiple people at one time as opposed to just one company?
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that I've experienced, and I think it probably speaks well to your background as well, is I've had exposure to a fair amount of VC firms and private equity firms, and how they nurture that relationship is always different, right? It's some of them have a lot of resources for you to use. Some of them have a lot of connections for you to utilize. As a CEO or a founder or a leader of a scaling company, how do you best articulate what your needs are to your partner, your financial partner, to look for that help. Because I know sometimes people are afraid to, like, I don't want to show, all my vulnerabilities, but, they're really there to help you partner and to be successful. And so from your perspective, what's the best way to leverage that relationship to get the help that they need?
Oh my gosh. The true answer is some are and some aren't. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, good
Absolutely.
investors are good at what they do because they're good at picking good companies and entrepreneurs to invest in.
Yeah.
Um, if you've been an operator and you're helpful to the company, that doesn't make you a great investor.
Right.
And so it goes both ways. I can remember calling some of my board members and saying, "Hey, I need help with this," and they're like, "Why are you bothering me? That's why we hired you." It's really, and others are incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
And others just can be time consuming. They're not helpful, and you end up with more stuff on your plate when you call them for help, as opposed to resolving the issue you called about. And so I think it's incumbent upon you as an entrepreneur to first recognize a couple of things. Number one, it's lonely at the top. And a lot of times you can't rely on your board to help get you out of a jam. They may not have the experience or the expertise. And yes, you're bothering them with details that they don't really care about. Their job is to hire and fire you.
Right.
And so you have to know who to leverage to solve what problem. And that could be surrounding yourself with more advisors, mentors, friends, coaches, peer group, people that can help you to navigate different scenarios. It may not always be your investors or your board.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think one of the things that so many founder CEOs get into in this stage of the game is needing to build out their team, right? They may go to their financial partner and say, "Hey, I've got this gap." Some of them may come with the team. Some of them may say, "Hey, I doubled down on a CFO, but I've got these gaps in the other places." From your perspective, how important is it to kind of have your team put together before you start to kind of court a financial partner versus, going in saying, "Hey, I've got my right hand man, but I need to kind of fill out the rest of my roster."
Yeah, it's really important that you have some semblance of a team. It doesn't have to be fully baked, depending on what stage, of course, your company is at. Later on, of course, you should have a team. Early on, there's a couple of flags that can get thrown if you bring too many to a meeting. Like I've been pitched by different companies where there's 4 people in the room and 2 of 4 are not adding value, and that works against you.
Right.
And so I'm probably answering more of the question than you asked, but I wrote a blog post about this, and it's people, PowerPoint, and Excel.
Yes.
And
Yep.
first and foremost, who are the people? PowerPoint, that's about the story that you're telling. How are you packaging the story that you're telling? And that's really important. In addition to having a great story, how you package it is important, because it can be a sign of how you're going to build the product, or how you package the product, or even of your ability to prioritize. And then the Excel is the evidence or the proof. It's the numbers portion. It's what's actually working about your business. And so I think fundraising is some combination of all of those. And so your question was about the team. How much of the team? Well, it depends. How good is your story and how much Excel do you have? If those are not as far along as you would like, then having a strong team, of course, will over-index in that category to make up for some of your shortfall in the PowerPoint and Excel part of your pitch.
Yeah. So it's kind of the 3-legged stool analogy. That makes a ton of sense. And I hadn't really thought of it that way, which it brings me to another point. There's always the question of profitability, right? When you're growing like crazy, how important is profitability when you're approaching a financial partner and you're making the pitch? Obviously growth plays a ton into it, but what's your perspective on profitability, and how close do you have to be to really make it an appealing transaction?
Well, I think it depends on the business. If you're profitable at the expense of growth, that could be a signal that you're too cautious. But the nice thing about profitability is that it gives the entrepreneur leverage. You don't have to raise money. You want to raise money. Why? Because you think there's a bigger opportunity that you're potentially leaving on the table. Um, but you don't need money. You don't need them to survive. Um, but funny enough, a lot of businesses like that just aren't venture backable. It still has to be a huge market opportunity. There's got to be tremendous upside. There's got to be an act two and an act three to the business. It can't just be a moment in time where you happen to be profitable and therefore you're entitled to money.
Right.
Remember that investors, as venture capitalists, the job is to return outsized capital returns to your limited partners. It's to make your limited partners money. That's the job.
Mm-hmm.
And so an investor's motivation for investing isn't to have a nice little business or to help you to reach more customers. It's to return capital to their limited partners. And so you have to have a compelling vision as to how your company is going to do that, or else it's just not going to be a potential fit. And of course, there's different investors for different sizes and different types of businesses. But for the most part, what an investor is going to value is the people, the PowerPoint, and the Excel. And the Excel portion is the profit that can be part of the profitability story.
What do you think when they go into that pitch and they've got, those 3 points, or they think they do? What do they miss on the most often? What's the thing where you're like, that's not, you haven't quite sold me? Is there a commonality that you see in the pitches that you're like, you're close, but you're just, you're not compelling me to want to move forward?
It's so funny. I've seen strengths and weaknesses in all of the categories. And, I may have written about this, but a friend called and he said, "Hey, I'm raising money for my next company." He sold his first company. It was a great outcome. And he says, "I'm raising money for my next company." I said, "Great. What are you doing?" He said, "This is what we're doing." I said, "Send me the deck." He said, "I don't have a deck. There are no slides. And you're in or out. I have 5 term sheets. So I want you in, but no, I'm not doing slides. And I have this is what we're doing." He gave me a 1-sentence elevator pitch. He said, "We're Glassdoor 2.0. That's what we're doing. Are you in or out?" And so he was able to raise 100% on his reputation. I've seen other entrepreneurs that they're first-time founders, they're young, they've never done it before, they're just out of college, but they've got a phenomenal story they're telling. And they're telling a story that's just well beyond their years from an experience standpoint. And you say, well, why not, right? Because
Right.
Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook when he was in college, right? He didn't really have the experience, but it didn't matter, right?
Right.
And then I've seen other businesses that don't seem so compelling, but they have huge numbers, right? Meaning actual customers and
Right.
lots of dollars. I remember I met with an entrepreneur and I thought I was doing her a favor. And then she started showing me her deck and she got to the slide where she says, "And we're doing $5 million in recurring revenue and we haven't raised any money." And I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, her numbers were so compelling.
Right.
And so I've been surprised on all fronts. It's, but what I would say is that you have to have strength in as many of those categories as you can and outsized strengths in at least one of them. Right.
Yeah.
So as you're getting ready to go pitch, be realistic, be honest with yourselves and say, how are we, assuming it's a 100-point exam and you can get 33 points for each section, how strong are we as a founding team? And if you're not that strong, well, go get a strong co-founder, somebody strong technically, a strong product, somebody who's been in the industry, so you can strengthen the team. And if you're telling a story, is it a compelling story? Get feedback. You only get one chance to make a great first impression. Go get feedback on your deck and ask for honest, candid feedback from friends, from family, from any friendly investors who you're not pitching, you're seeking advice.
Right.
I'll tell you one quick story here. Somebody told me once, if you're asking for money, you get advice. And if you're asking for advice, you get money.
True.
And I know a woman that used to work with me. She said, "Hey, this is my new business. I don't have a deck, but I prepared a memo and I'd love for you to read my memo." And I read her memo and said, "I want to invest." Like, her memo is so good. I know she's a rock star. And it's a perfect example of, she wasn't looking for money. She was looking for my advice. And I said, "I want to invest." right? And
Yeah.
so don't be afraid to get feedback in advance, because you want to go in with your best foot forward.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I have the same experience with jobs. Every time I call somebody for advice on a job, they try to give me one. And every time I try to get a job, they're like, well, you should do this. So I can totally relate to that.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me about your favorite kind of company to invest in? Where do you see that they have opportunities for you to really, jump in and help them get to the next level?
Well, it's people that are that want help. They're curious. They don't know all the answers. They're onto something good. They're capable, but they're coachable, right? It's not the entrepreneur that says, "Look, I have all the answers." And again, that doesn't mean it's a great investment. If you think about it, you would rather invest in the competent team that doesn't really need any help, and you were
Right.
lucky enough to invest. But it's the people that are coachable, they're curious, they're high integrity, they're smart, they're hardworking, um, and they're onto something really compelling, right? Like I look at these businesses where there's just something special about it. It's got an element of virality, meaning customers bring other customers, or word of mouth, or something. They're special in some way.
Hmm.
Um, it's obviously has to be a huge market. I prefer aspirin, not vitamin. So true painkillers as have to have, not
Right.
nice to have.
Yeah.
Things like that are what are appealing to me.
That's awesome. I would love to know from your perspective. We have so many uh, entrepreneurs, and they've maybe gotten some angel investors. They've done some bootstrapping, and they're trying to figure out, do I need a financial partner? Should I go the VC route? Should I go the private equity route? Either way, you're probably looking at a 3-year commitment. It's not like you're going to jump into those and move forward. What would be some advice that you would give somebody looking for a financial partner and like, hey, maybe you need to go down this path of PE versus VC, or maybe you just need to keep bootstrapping. To your point, the example with 5 million in recurring revenue, and if they're profitable, why not just keep going that way? How would you advise them in that situation?
Well, I think you have to begin with the end in mind and say, what is it that you really want to accomplish?
Yeah.
There's a lot of businesses. I was chatting with somebody about a year ago, and they said, what should we do? We haven't taken money, and we're doing 10 million in revenue. We've got this great business, and then I said, well, do you need money? And they said, no, we have about $5 million in the bank. And I'm like, well, why would you even take money? You don't
Right.
need it. And as soon as you take it, the outcomes are now different. My outcome as an investor is different from yours as an entrepreneur. And if you get an offer to sell for $20 million and I say, no way, I just invested and I'm not interested in that. I'm looking for a much bigger return.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden their goals are not aligned. And so it's really incumbent upon the entrepreneur to know what it is that they want to accomplish, right? Begin with the end in mind.
Yeah.
And then assuming that money will help to achieve that, well, then it's got to be aligned with the goal of the investor as well. So an early stage investor may be happy with a 3 to 5x return, or a late stage investor may be happy with that. But as a venture investor, like that's not, that's worthy of like a golf clap. That's not a standing ovation. And you want to have a standing ovation, and very few of them turn out to be standing ovations. Most of them are golf claps. And
Right.
so you just have to recognize, what it is that you want, and does that align with the investor, the
Yeah,
goals of.
that makes sense. One of the things that I think is always interesting when we get involved with a relationship, and um, you get so far into it, and the CEO starts to realize that maybe they've kind of hit the ceiling of their skill set, right? And so they think that they're the person that kind of gets them to the next step, but then they start to realize, hey, I really loved starting this new company. I loved the deal, but I don't know if I'm the guy that can get us from, 5 million to 10 or 10 to 40. How do you help them evaluate that and work through that? Because I would imagine you've seen that from time to time where you're like, hey, we've run out of capacity with this CEO.
Well, it's not only capacity with the CEO, it's the motivation of the CEO. There's both. It's like
Yeah.
you have the capacity, but do you want to go the distance? And is it your strength? Is that what you're genuinely good at? And I think a lot of people say, no, 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 it's my strength and I really want to do it, but they don't really want to do it. If you
Right.
ask them, is this fun for you? I had uh, an early employee. He wanted to stay in the role. He wanted to have a bigger role in the company. He kept saying, I want to be the VP of engineering. I want to do this job. And I'd say, I don't understand why. You don't even like that activity.
Yeah.
And so first and foremost, I would encourage the CEO or the founder or the VP of whatever, whoever the employee is, to really assess what it is that they like doing and what are they good at and what do they want to do on a daily basis and why, right? And just really try and get to the motivation. Do they want it because they want the title and they think it's going to help them get the next job? Or do they think that it means more money? Or what is it? And, I myself had this dilemma. I was the CEO of Odesk for 9 years and trying to figure out what do you want to do when you grow up? Do you want to run a publicly traded company? And while it would have been great growth and development, it wouldn't have been good balance.
Right.
And I didn't really want to do that. Like, so to your point, like, there's jungle, there's dirt road, and there's highway. And where do you like to operate and what do you like to do? And I've been on the highway many times. It turns out I'm more of a jungle, dirt road, paved road. Like I like merging onto the highway, but
Right.
then let's get somebody else to drive the Lexus, right?
Right.
I like driving a sports car. And so um, recognizing that is really important. And then if you do say, look, I don't really want to drive the Lexus, but I want to be a passenger in that car, well, then set yourself up for success, right? Get a
Right.
really good driver and a really good co-pilot and get yourself a spot in the car. But at the end of the day, I think what's important is that you get to the destination that you're going to and that you enjoy the ride.
Right.
And if you're not going to enjoy driving, don't hold on to the wheel too long, right?
Yeah, no, I think that is a great point. And I think a lot of founder CEOs feel a responsibility, right? Because it's so personal to them. It's kind of, like one of their kids. They don't want to leave their kid on the side of the road, but at the same time, it's like you're not doing anybody any favors when you're not enjoying it, and it's painful. I know that you have had this experience. I've had it, and I'm not even in VC. So when someone gets their financial partner, they get the money, they've, kind of said, this is how we're going to grow. And then all of the sudden, shiny object syndrome pops up and there's 700 priorities and you got to kind of reel them in. How do you get them kind of back and, let them run the company, but bring them back in and say, listen, we got to focus and we've got to get some results. How does that conversation usually transpire from your perspective?
Well, there's a couple, the saying is most startups die of indigestion, not starvation. And it's you try to do too much. And before Odesk, I worked at a small startup. I was one of the early team members and we died of indigestion. We couldn't declare a major. And so we'd gone, think of it as going through college and every other day you'd say, now I'm pre-law, now I'm pre-med, now I'm computer science. You can't do that.
Right.
And so you can't even do it if they're in the same school, what I mean? Like in the
Right.
same thematic. And so somebody gave me coaching once. They said 90% of CEOs are underfocused and 10% are overfocused. And neither one of those is good. Right. So
Right.
there's a risk in being overfocused. It's just less people are.
Right.
And there's a huge risk in being underfocused, and most CEOs are. And so ruthless prioritization is really, really important. It's, recognizing that first, I always liken it to a journey. Let's say we're going on a trip together, a bus trip, and we all have to like contribute and we all have to get there. And so before we can drive from California to New York, we have to go to Colorado. And so we don't have to get all the way to New York. We just have to get to Colorado. And then people need to know what's important on that journey. Is it safety? Is it speed? Is it cost? What's the metric we're going to use? Well, it's speed. We want to get to Colorado as soon as possible. However, we can't lose any lives, and we only have a certain amount we can spend. And by the time we get there, everybody's got to be happy and energized. And so you can think of all the things that have to go in there, but the most important thing is that we get to Colorado. And so that having that focus or that prioritization where everybody knows what the priority is, I think really helps. It helps that focus, you know, and then once you get there, then you can say, okay, now we're shifting. And if you're never going to get there, it's okay to shift and say, we're not going there anymore. We're going here, but at least we're going one place, not 5 places.
Right. And it's clear, right? We've got the vision, we've got, we've set the priorities.
So
Well, that's perfect.
Everybody needs that clarity. People in the company need to know where you're going, how you're going to get there, and who's responsible for what, and how you're going to measure.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? Who's responsible for what? What's your role? What's my role? And how are we going to measure as a company, but also how would you measure in your role and how would I measure in my role?
Yeah, and that is one thing that, and I know we're running up on time here, but I would love your perspective on that measurement piece, because it's one of the things that I find when I jump into a company that's kind of at the scaling stage is that a few things they'll measure pretty well, like they know what their recurring revenue is. They generally are starting to get a pretty good handle on their pipe, but these other metrics that are, what are we trending for? What's our support tickets like? What's actionable? They just haven't got a lot of discipline and history. If you were going to give a founder, CEO, or even a leadership team advice on, hey, know your numbers, and here's, 4 or 5 metrics that are super important that aren't sales related, what would they be?
Well, I think it depends by company. And I was given advice once because we were so well instrumented, we had too many metrics. And I was told that we were over measured and under prioritized. Because I was saying, look, I had the top level metrics, but then I had 20 underneath that.
Right.
So there's a risk in having too many too, because some of them don't really matter. And so again, I think when you determine where you're going and how you're going to get there, that should indicate what metrics are most important. I'll give you an example. For us, the business was growing quite well at Odesk in the early days, but we lost sight of quality. And so even though the hours and dollars were coming in, very similar to eBay, the reputation of the business could be tarnished if you didn't deliver a great experience for everybody. And most of the time, the experience was most tarnished by being matched with a poor quality worker. So you have a client and a worker, and if you don't make a great match every time and deliver a great result, people are not going to use you again. And more importantly, they're not going to tell a friend about how great your business is. So that net promoter score, and more importantly than the net promoter score, why is the score high or low, became a key metric for us. Even more than the dollars and the hours.
Right.
So we could have afforded to slow growth at the expense of quality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I could spend another hour talking about net promoter, because I think it's underutilized and people don't really know how to implement it, and then how to, actually make action on those results to move it one way or the other. But we're out of time for today, and I don't want to take up any more of your time in case I need to ask you again. So I really appreciate you taking the time today. And I know for anybody that's watching, if you are interested in following Gary or reaching out to him, you can easily find him on LinkedIn. He's very, very active, and I strongly recommend that you do that. Tons of articles out there. Any place else that they should look for you, Gary?
No, I think LinkedIn is that's my primary platform for content.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope to chat with you again soon.
Thanks, Tara. I enjoyed being here.